For the second generation overseas Indians in that age group that I was describing, about 15 to 35, for the individuals who are getting married somewhere in that 25 to 35 years of age, I have personally noticed a lot of interreligion weddings. The children are going to school together, they grow up, they pursue very good, for overseas Indians, they pursue really good educational careers. They do very well in their career, in their school, in their college, in their jobs, and they like to meet somebody of a similar mindset. And oftentimes when they get married, it could be within the same sect or the same community or same religion, but it could also be from an interreligion type of a wedding. And this often puts a healthy tension in some cases, but in other cases, it puts quite a bit of stress, not only for the families of the groom and the bride, but also for the groom and the bride themselves. Even in India, while interreligion marriages is probably not that prevalent, having said, weddings within within different sects is becoming very common or is commonly observed. So the topics that we are going to cover today on this video is applicable to both interreligion weddings and the things to consider, as well as when weddings happen within the same sect. As an example, within Hinduism itself, there's so many different sects, each having their own practices, each having their own beliefs. And it's not uncommon to find the bride and the groom coming from two different sects. And of course, there is still a majority that happens within the same religion, happens within the same sect. So I'm not saying let's discount that. That's always there. But I'm talking about the cases where there's an interreligion, intersect wedding that's happening. There's 5 factors to consider. Whether you're already married or whether you're planning to get married, there's 5 factors to consider when you're looking at an interreligion or an intersect wedding. First is financial. I'm starting off with financial because it's not an issue probably for somebody living in the US, where there is a distinction and how the legality and the legal system handles religions, where they keep it separate from your belief, from what happens from an economic standpoint. So it's not an issue if, let us say, somebody of an Indian origin, of a Hindu background, gets married to somebody who is an American to begin with. Let us assume belongs to a Christian tradition, as an example. From a legal financial standpoint, the inheritance rights and everything of financial assets and all of that don't make much of a difference because there's a clear separation. But I believe, I'm not an expert, but I believe in India, there is that the Hindu head of the family laws that get applied versus some other laws that get applied if you are of a different religion. So understanding the financial implications is key. No matter which country you are in, I would strongly recommend, if it's an interreligion wedding, definitely get that cleared up and get some counsel and advice on that. The second factor to consider is the cultural differences. Now, the cultural differences arise from the macrogenetic code of the country itself. Somebody born and brought up in India, then moved to the US or some other overseas country, or somebody who's lived and born and brought up in the US itself or any other overseas country. So there is that macrogenetic code of the nation and the culture of it. So the cultural differences, you could put it into tradition and practices. The best way to handle cultural differences is to keep traditions for what they are and not bring any type of God or faith into that, but just leverage traditions for what they are, leverage practices for what they are. As an example, you may have a Thanksgiving ritual. Some religions don't have a Thanksgiving ritual, but viewing Thanksgiving purely as a tradition of bringing the family together doesn't bring faith and all of that into the discussion. It keeps it very objective. So the best way to handle cultural differences is to look at it purely as a practice and tradition and see if you can have an equanimity of the two different religions coming together. So taking some practices from one religion, taking the practices of the other religion, and adopting them for the harmony of the families, but also the harmony of the bride and the groom. So looking at cultural differences that way, viewing traditions and practices purely from that, not linking it to faith, God, or anything else. Third thing is cuisine or food. This is a big one. And this distinction is even tougher if the bride and the groom are, one is a vegetarian, another is a non-vegetarian, as an example. Or even just the cuisines, the taste, even within the same religion, like Hinduism, if you come from two different sects, even if you are a vegetarian, the taste, the type of spices you use, and the cuisine are so different even in that case. So this applies even within the same sect, but different geography, different sects for sure, different religions, absolutely sure. Coming to a midway on addressing the cuisine and the food taste becomes important. And I did a video on vegetarianism versus non-vegetarianism. You may want to watch that to get some insights if you really want to follow the Gita and the Upanishadic way in your cooking and in your cuisine. So that is the third one. Financial first, cultural tradition practices, part of cultural second, food or cuisine is the third one. The fourth is language, another very important one. A lot of the emotions are expressed in your mother tongue, particularly if it's not English. When it's any other Indian colloquial language, the emotions feel and appear to be better expressed just because of the breadth of the syllables you have in the language. The emotions are better expressed in that language or in any native Indian colloquial language. Doesn't have to be your mother tongue, but pretty much all the languages in India have that breadth of syllables. The range is quite a lot. So the emotions are better expressed. Now, if all the emotions are being expressed in English, which is another fantastic international language, you need to make sure that that is being supplemented with the right body language, with the right type of body connection. It's a good example. Just saying I'm sorry probably will not express the emotion as much as if you say I'm sorry and give a hug in that regard. So you can compensate and bring that emotional feel. If you are from a different language, if you are an Indian with a colloquial native language and you struggle expressing it in English as an example, then you can supplement it those ways and bring that language, close the gap of that language aspects. Now for your kids and for your children, you have the best. You can have them raised and grow speaking multiple languages. If the bride and the groom are different languages, the child can be taught both of them so that the communication can happen in multiple languages. That's not the issue at all in that sense, as long as you are making sure that learning is happening with multiple languages. So that is the fourth one, language. The last, I've kept it for the last, is faith and belief in God. This becomes a tricky subject. It's a sensitive subject. Interreligion means you're dealing with different aspects of personal form of the God. If you stick to the Gita and the Upanishad and you look at supreme and divinity as that ball of energy and focus more on the characteristics, then not an issue. But I know that's hard. You want to focus on a personal form versus an abstract form. And that's where it becomes sensitive in interreligion. How do you address it? The way to address that, definitely for the bride and the groom, and even for the families of the bride and the groom, is to get onto the spiritual mindset. When you get onto the spiritual mindset, then you're looking at unity in diversity. Since you're going beyond the personal name and form, you're going beyond the nama and rupa. You're going beyond that. You're getting into that unity in diversity. By focusing on and getting onto a spiritual mindset, you see more commonality. Once you are there, once you have developed that mindset, then you get to what I call the earthly plane, or the more personal form of faith and deity and God, then you don't have a hatred or you're not against it at all, but instead you just see that to be one entity in this bigger universe. And the personal name and form doesn't matter much. And if there's some rituals and practices associated with that name and form, you just take it as tradition and practices, and not really put some kind of a divinity aspect into that or some kind of a God aspect into it, but you would follow the practices. It's like going to an interview, you wear a suit and a jacket and a tie, versus probably if you were going to the beach, you would wear a different attire. It's just practices. It's just making sure you're dressed for that occasion, you're following the practices when you are in that type of a setting, and you are being part of that community over there when you are in that setting. That way you're still maintaining your value system. Both of you are on the spiritual mindset. The families are on the spiritual mindset. Where and when necessary, you're looking at the personal or the earthly forms of deities and everything, and you're seeing if you really want to indulge in it. Or in some families, you may say, you know what, we as a family will focus only on spirituality. We don't really need to follow any of those personal forms and shapes and being affinate, having that affinity towards that. That's your choice as well. So in closure, if you're getting into an interreligion wedding, or you're already in an interreligion wedding or an intersect wedding, focus on these 5 factors. See how best you can address financial, cultural, cuisine, food, language, lastly, matters of faith and belief in God.